The sound that broke me was not the drill. It was the last screw hitting my porch like a dropped coin while my son was still 90 miles from home. It was 7:08 on a gray Thursday morning in Maple Ridge Estates, and I was standing in my kitchen pouring coffee into a chipped blue mug when the front of my house started screaming. Not a human scream. Worse, a power drill biting into wood, high and sharp, followed by the heavy scrape of boards being dragged across painted steps. The smell hit next when I opened the door: fresh sawdust, cold air, and the faint burnt metal odor of a drill bit working too hard. Two men in gray work shirts were crouched on my porch, removing the ramp I had spent 3 weeks building with my own hands. The ramp that led from the driveway to the front door. The ramp I had measured, sanded, braced, and sealed because my son Caleb was coming home from the rehabilitation center the next afternoon. For a second, I could not make my mouth work. I just stared at the empty line where the handrail had been, at the screw holes dark against the white trim, at the boards stacked on the lawn like somebody had taken apart a promise and left it in pieces. Then I saw Vivian Hartwell standing by the curb beside her white Lexus SUV, and the air around me went cold in a way the weather had nothing to do with. Vivian was the president of the Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, a heavy-set white woman in her mid-50s who dressed like every sidewalk was a runway, and every neighbor owed her applause. That morning she wore a red blazer bright enough to stop traffic, black slacks pressed sharp, gold bracelets that flashed every time she lifted her clipboard, oversized sunglasses, and red nails wrapped around a pen like she was signing somebody else's fate. Her perfume drifted through the sawdust, sweet and expensive, the kind of smell that tries to cover what is rotten underneath. She looked at me over the top of her sunglasses and smiled like this was all very unfortunate, but completely necessary. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice smooth as butter on a hot skillet. That ramp was never approved. "My name is Martin Hayes. I am 56 years old, a semi-retired carpenter, and I have lived in that modest blue house for 17 years. I built the back deck, repaired the porch columns, replaced the kitchen cabinets, and fixed half the squeaky floors myself. I know wood. I know weight. I know the difference between a shortcut and something built to carry what matters." That ramp was 32 inches wide, with a steady slope, side rails, non-slip strips, and bracing strong enough to hold a refrigerator cart. I had checked the city accessibility guidance, measured twice, and sealed every joint before sunset. It was not pretty in the way Vivian liked things to be pretty. It was better than pretty. It was useful. "You need to stop," I said to the workers. One of them froze with the drill still in his hand. The other looked toward Vivian. She tapped her clipboard once. "Click. Continue," she said. That little word landed harder than any shout. I stepped onto the porch and saw the violation notice taped to my front door, its white paper fluttering in the morning breeze. Unauthorized exterior modification. Visual disharmony. Removal authorized after noncompliance. My fingers curled around the paper. Caleb's discharge packet was on my kitchen table, beside the grocery list for his first dinner home, beside the small American flag his sister had left from the welcome sign she was making. Vivian did not know that. Or maybe worse, she did not care. She pointed at the half-removed ramp and said, "We cannot allow one emotional situation to lower the standards of the entire community." I remember the drill starting again. I remember the board lifting away. I remember the porch suddenly looking too high for the boy I had promised would never have to fight just to come through his own front door. I did not sleep much the night before they took that ramp. I had been awake past midnight, sitting at the kitchen table under the yellow light, going over Caleb's discharge instructions one more time with my reading glasses sliding down my nose. The papers smelled like hospital printer ink and hand sanitizer, even after 3 days in my house. Keep pathways clear. Avoid uneven steps. Use rail support when entering and exiting the home. Those sentences looked simple on paper, but to a father, they carried weight. Caleb was 27, old enough to have served overseas, old enough to tell me he was fine even when his voice was tired, but he was still my boy. He was still the kid who used to run across that same front yard with grass stains on his knees and a plastic airplane in one hand. When the rehabilitation coordinator called and said he could come home Friday, I looked at my front steps and saw them differently. 3 steps, 22 inches from walkway to porch. Nothing to most people. A mountain when your son is coming home with a body that needs time, balance, and dignity. I started building the ramp the next morning. I pulled treated lumber from Miller's Supply, loaded it into my old pickup, and spent the ride home smelling fresh pine through the back window. I used my father's steel tape, the one with the numbers worn soft from 40 years of job sites. I marked every cut with a carpenter pencil sharpened flat on one side. The sawdust stuck to my sleeves. The drill warmed in my palm. Every screw went in slow and straight because I was not building a decoration. I was building the first welcome home my son would feel under his feet. My daughter Rachel came by with a casserole and stood in the yard watching me test the slope with a level. She asked if I needed help painting the welcome sign. I told her yes, because sometimes you let people help even when your hands know what to do. She painted Welcome Home, Caleb, on a piece of whiteboard while I sanded the handrail smooth enough that it would not catch on skin or cloth. By sunset, the ramp sat solid against the porch, plain but strong, the color of fresh cedar and promise. Neighbors passed by and nodded. Mrs. Alvarez from 2 houses down said it looked well made. Old Tom Grady across the street gave me a thumbs up from his mailbox. Nobody complained that day. Nobody said visual disharmony until Vivian needed a weapon with prettier words. Maple Ridge Estates had always been a quiet place before she took over the HOA. Not perfect, but decent. People waved. Kids rode bikes in the cul-de-sac. Lawns got mowed when weather allowed, and nobody measured the world with a clipboard. Then Vivian Hartwell became president, and suddenly every porch light, flower pot, mailbox post, and driveway stain became evidence in some private trial only she understood. I kept my head down because I had other things to worry about. Doctor calls. Insurance forms. Caleb's room. The bathroom grab bar I installed beside the shower. The new chair by the front window where he could sit and see the maple tree he planted in 5th grade. I thought if I explained the ramp, any normal person would understand. That was my mistake. Vivian was not looking for understanding. She was looking for control, and my porch had given her something to control. Caleb never wanted the neighborhood to know the details. That was one of the first things he told me from the rehabilitation center, his voice low through the phone, the line crackling while I stood in the hallway with a notepad in one hand and my heart in the other. Dad, I do not want people staring, he said. I just want to come home. So I kept the story small. I told Mrs. Alvarez he was recovering. I told Tom Grady he would need quiet for a while. I told Rachel not to post anything online, not even the welcome sign, until Caleb was ready. Some people mistake privacy for shame, but that was not what it was. My son had spent years being brave in places most of us only hear about on the evening news. He had worn the uniform, done the work, and come home with an injury that changed how he moved through the world. He did not owe Maple Ridge Estates a full explanation just because Vivian Hartwell liked her gossip, dressed up as community concern. When Caleb was little, he was always in motion. He climbed the maple tree before I finished building the lower branch steps. He raced his bike down the driveway, so fast his mother used to press both hands to her chest and tell him he was going to scare the gray right into her hair. He loved storms, model airplanes, old war movies with his grandfather, and pancakes shaped like stars. The house still carried him in small ways. A pencil mark inside the pantry door showed where he stood at age 8, 4 feet 2 inches and proud as a king. A scuff near the hallway corner came from the time he tried to slide across the floor in socks and learned that walls do not move. In his bedroom closet, there was still a shoebox full of baseball cards and a broken compass he insisted would work again someday. That was the Caleb I was preparing the house for, not some symbol for Vivian to judge from the sidewalk. The ramp was only one part of it. I moved the living room rug because the corner curled. I installed a grab bar in the bathroom and tested it with my full weight until the wall did not even creak. I cleared the hallway, lowered the shelf in his room, and put a sturdy chair near the front window where the afternoon sun came through warm and gentle. Every little change made the house feel less like mine and more like a landing place. A place where a man could recover without being watched like a problem. The rehabilitation coordinator told me Caleb was doing well, but would need patience, open space, steady surfaces, and no unnecessary obstacles. I wrote those words down and underlined no unnecessary obstacles twice. Then Vivian looked at the most necessary thing on my porch and called it an unauthorized structure. She did not see Caleb's discharge papers on the kitchen table. She did not see Rachel's painted sign drying beside the sink. She did not see me sanding that handrail at midnight until it felt smooth under my palm. She saw a ramp that did not match her idea of the neighborhood. And in her world, matching mattered more than mercy. Vivian Hartwell did not start with the drill. People like her rarely begin with the obvious damage. They begin with paper, perfume, and words soft enough to pass as concern. The first notice came on Monday morning, folded into a white envelope and tucked under the brass clip on my mailbox like a warning dressed for church. I was carrying a box of medical supplies from my truck when I saw it, and for half a second I thought it was another insurance form. Then I saw the Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association seal at the top and felt my stomach tighten. Unauthorized exterior modification. Failure to submit architectural review request. Possible negative impact on visual harmony. I stood in the driveway with gauze pads, hand sanitizer, and Caleb's new shower seat in one arm, reading a complaint about the ramp I had built so my son could get through his own front door without being turned into a spectacle. The morning air smelled like wet leaves and fresh cedar from the ramp boards. That smell had comforted me all weekend. Now it just made the paper in my hand feel colder. I emailed the management company within the hour. I explained that the ramp was temporary, medically necessary, safely built, and connected to my son's scheduled return from a rehabilitation center. I did not include private details. I did not need to. I attached a photo of the ramp, measurements, and a simple note from the coordinator stating that Caleb required step-free access at home. I thought that would end it. Any decent person would read those words and step back. Vivian stepped forward. Her reply arrived at 4:16 that afternoon, copied to the entire board. Mr. Hayes, while the association sympathizes with family circumstances, emotional urgency does not override community procedure. The phrase emotional urgency stayed with me. I read it twice in the quiet kitchen while the dishwasher clicked through its cycle and Rachel's welcome sign dried near the sink. Emotional urgency. As if a father preparing a safe entrance for his injured son was some kind of decoration crisis. The second notice came Tuesday. Exterior design violation. The third came Wednesday. Obstruction of uniform porch presentation. Vivian did not just want the ramp removed. She wanted the story rewritten, so she sounded responsible and I sounded unreasonable. By Wednesday night, a photo of my porch appeared in the private neighborhood group. The angle was low and crooked, chosen to make the ramp look larger than it was. Vivian wrote that several residents had expressed concern over unapproved structures changing the character of Maple Ridge. She did not mention Caleb. She did not mention the rehabilitation center. She did not mention the note I had already sent. In the comments, someone asked if the ramp was for a medical reason. Vivian answered, "We cannot discuss private claims, but standards must remain consistent for everyone." Private claims. That was my son now, reduced to two polished words under a blurry picture. I sat at the kitchen table with my jaw locked and my hands flat against the wood until the anger passed through me and left something steadier behind. I printed every email. I saved every screenshot. I wrote the time and date on each notice. Outside, the ramp sat under the porch light, solid, plain, and honest, while Vivian tried to make compassion look like noncompliance. The next morning, she arrived with the workers. By 8:30 that Thursday morning, the ramp was gone. Not damaged beyond use, not carefully set aside, not preserved with the smallest trace of respect. Gone from the porch like it had never belonged there. The workers stacked the boards beside my garage, rails leaning crooked against the siding, screws scattered in the grass where the dew caught them like little silver teeth. I stood on the walkway holding the violation notice while Vivian watched from the curb, her red blazer glowing against the gray sky, her gold bracelets flashing every time she checked her phone. The porch looked naked without the ramp. Too high, too clean, too obedient to her version of the neighborhood. "You will receive an invoice for removal labor," she said, as if she had done me a favor. I looked at the screw holes in the steps, the pale rectangles where the support brackets had protected the paint, the sawdust gathered in the corners like evidence nobody had bothered to sweep away. "My son comes home tomorrow," I said. Vivian lowered her sunglasses just enough to show me eyes that were not sorry. "Then I suggest you make arrangements that comply with the architectural process." Arrangements. That word nearly broke something loose in me. I had made arrangements. I had moved furniture, installed bathroom rails, widened the path through the hallway, stocked the refrigerator, washed his old blankets, and built the safest entrance I knew how to build. I had measured every board with a father's fear hiding behind a carpenter's precision. But to Vivian, all of that was just inconvenience wearing work boots. I called the management company as soon as her SUV turned the corner. The woman who answered sounded like she was reading from a laminated card. I explained the medical note again. I explained the discharge date. I explained that the association had removed a temporary access ramp after being informed of its purpose. She paused, then said, "Mr. Hayes, the board has authority to correct unauthorized exterior alterations." I asked whether the board had reviewed the accommodation request. Another pause. The kind that tells you somebody is deciding how little to say. All owners must follow the approval process. I hung up before my voice could turn into something Caleb would have been ashamed to hear. Then I called Vivian directly. She answered on the third ring with wind noise behind her, probably still walking the neighborhood like a queen inspecting fences. "Martin," she said, warm as fake honey. I told her I wanted the ramp returned by evening. I told her I had sent documentation. I told her I would file a formal complaint if Caleb could not safely enter his home. She sighed, long and theatrical. "You are making this more dramatic than it needs to be. We cannot let every personal hardship override community standards." Personal hardship. My fingers tightened around the phone until the plastic case creaked. Outside, a delivery van slowed near my house. The driver looked at the boards stacked beside the garage, then at the empty porch, then drove on. I felt the whole street watching without wanting to be seen. That afternoon, Vivian posted again. A carefully worded message about consistent enforcement, fairness to all homeowners, and preventing emotional exceptions from weakening property values. She never used my name. She did not need to. Under the post, one person wrote that rules were rules. Another wrote that ramps should be in the back, out of sight. Then Mrs. Alvarez replied with one sentence that made the comments stop for 10 full minutes. "Sometimes the front door matters because that is where family comes home." I printed that too. Not because it was evidence, but because it reminded me the whole neighborhood had not gone cold. By evening, Rachel arrived and found me on the porch steps, staring at the empty walkway. She did not say anything at first. She just sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched, and looked at the boards I had built for her brother. The air smelled like cut wood, rain coming soon, and dinner I had forgotten to start. "We can put it back tonight," she said. I shook my head. Not because I did not want to. Because Vivian would use that too. She would call it defiance. She would send another fine. She would make Caleb's first day home another battlefield. So I did the hardest thing a carpenter can do when something useful has been taken apart. I left the boards where they were, took pictures of every screw hole, every cut mark, every piece of hardware, and started building a file instead of a ramp. Caleb came home at 3:18 on Friday afternoon under a sky the color of old pewter. I remember the exact minute because I had been watching the clock since sunrise, pretending to clean counters that were already clean, pretending to fold towels that had already been folded, pretending my hands were steady every time I looked at the empty porch. Rachel had taped the welcome sign inside the front window instead of outside, because neither of us could stand seeing it above the place where the ramp should have been. The house smelled like pot roast, furniture polish, and the lavender detergent I had used on Caleb's blankets. Everything was ready except the one thing that mattered most. When the medical transport van turned onto our street, my chest tightened so hard I had to put one hand against the doorframe. The van stopped in the driveway with a soft brake squeal. Rachel stepped out first, wiping her palms on her jeans, smiling too brightly, because daughters try to be brave for fathers when fathers are failing. Then the side door opened, and there was Caleb, thinner than I remembered, pale from too many indoor lights. A baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He wore a gray sweatshirt, loose sweatpants, and the careful expression of a man determined not to show anyone how much effort the smallest movements cost him. The driver brought out the mobility chair and positioned it on the driveway. The wheels made a quiet rubber sound against the concrete. That sound was simple, normal. It still went straight through me. Caleb looked at me, then at the porch, then at the 3 steps rising between him and the front door of the house where he had grown up. His eyes stopped on the screw holes, then the boards stacked beside the garage, then the pale sawdust still clinging to the edge of the walkway because I had not swept it away. I wanted him to be angry. I wanted him to say something sharp, something that would let me carry the pain for both of us. But he just took a slow breath and nodded once, like he was filing the disappointment somewhere private. "Looks like we have a little problem," he said. His voice was calm. That was what hurt most. Rachel turned away fast, pretending to check the bag of medications. I walked to him and knelt beside the chair, feeling the cold driveway through my jeans. "I am sorry, son," I said. "I should have stopped them." Caleb looked past me at the front window, at the welcome sign with his name in Rachel's careful blue letters. "You built it, did you not?" he asked. I nodded. "Then you did your part." The driver offered to help us use a portable folding ramp from the van, but it was narrow, steep, and meant for temporary loading, not a front porch entrance. I watched Caleb grip the side rails, his jaw tight, while the driver and I guided him slowly toward the threshold. Every inch felt like an apology. The wheels bumped once at the lip of the porch. Not hard, not unsafe with help, but enough that Caleb closed his eyes for half a second, and I saw the boy who used to leap those steps two at a time, trapped behind the man forced to measure them now. Across the street, a curtain moved in Vivian Hartwell's front window. I saw the white flash of her sleeve before it disappeared. She was watching. Of course she was watching. When Caleb finally crossed into the living room, Rachel let out a breath that sounded almost like a sob. I set one hand on the doorframe and looked back at the empty porch. The screw holes were still there, dark and round, lined up like little witnesses. Vivian had wanted visual harmony. What she had created was a public record of cruelty polished in HOA language. I did not rebuild the ramp that night. I helped my son settle into his chair by the window. I warmed dinner. I listened when he told us the pot roast smelled better than anything at the rehabilitation center. Then, after the house went quiet and Caleb fell asleep under the blanket his mother had made before she passed, I sat at the kitchen table with every email, every photo, every notice, every screenshot, and the discharge papers spread before me. The rain started after midnight, tapping softly against the windows. I picked up my father's carpenter pencil and wrote one word across the top of a fresh folder: access. By sunrise, the rain had washed the sawdust off the walkway, but it had not washed away the screw holes. They were darker now, little wet circles in the porch boards, lined up exactly where the ramp had been attached. I stood there in a hooded sweatshirt with coffee cooling in my hand, listening to water drip from the gutters and Caleb moving carefully inside the house. Every small sound from the living room made me aware of what Vivian had taken. The chair wheels on hardwood, the soft scrape of the footrest, the pause before a doorway. I had spent my life fixing things with wood and tools, but that morning I understood something I should have learned sooner. Some repairs start with paper. I took photographs in the gray light, close enough to show every hole, every scrape, every mark where the brackets had pressed against the paint. I photographed the boards stacked beside the garage, the rails, the hardware, the notice still wrinkled from the rain, and the empty path from driveway to porch. Then I went inside, spread everything across the kitchen table, and began sorting the file like I was building a frame from the foundation up. Emails in one stack, notices in another, screenshots from the neighborhood group, Caleb's discharge papers, the coordinator's note, my measurements, photographs of the ramp before Vivian's workers removed it. Rachel came in quietly and set a fresh cup of coffee beside me. She had not slept either. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "Tell me what to do." So I did. She called the rehabilitation center and asked for an updated letter explaining why step-free entry was necessary. I called the city accessibility office and explained that a medically necessary ramp had been removed from a private home after the association had received notice of the need. The woman on the phone stopped typing halfway through my sentence. I heard it, that sudden silence when a routine call becomes something else. She asked if I had documentation. I said yes. She asked if the ramp blocked a public sidewalk. I said no. She asked if the association had offered an alternate accommodation. I looked toward the living room, where Caleb was sitting by the window, pretending not to listen. No, I said. They offered an invoice. By noon, a city inspector named Paul Renner had agreed to come by. He arrived in a navy jacket with a tape measure clipped to his belt and rain still beating on his shoulders. He looked at the porch, the walkway, the board stack, and my original ramp photos without wasting words. He measured the rise, the run, the width of the path, and the distance to the sidewalk. The tape snapped back with a clean metallic click. "This did not obstruct public access," he said. "And your build was safer than most temporary ramps I see." I felt Rachel exhale beside me. I wrote his words down exactly. After that, I called the county Veterans Support Office. then a housing accommodation attorney recommended by Caleb's rehabilitation coordinator. I told the same story each time, and each time it became less like a complaint and more like a record. Nobody told me to shout. Nobody told me to threaten. They told me to preserve evidence, send a formal reasonable accommodation request, demand restoration, and document the harm caused by removal after notice. That evening, I drafted the letter at the kitchen table while Caleb slept under the old blanket, the rain tapping softly against the glass behind him. My carpenter pencil sat beside the keyboard because I still needed something familiar in my hand. I wrote slowly, plainly, and without one unnecessary word. The ramp was medically necessary. The association had prior notice. The removal created an access barrier. Immediate restoration was required. When I finished, I attached everything Vivian thought I would be too tired to save. Then I sent it to the management company, the board, the city accessibility office, and the attorney. The email made one small sound when it left my outbox. Soft. Almost nothing. But it felt stronger than any drill. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 6 o'clock in the Maple Ridge Clubhouse, which smelled like floor polish, stale coffee, and the kind of nervous silence people bring when they know a problem has grown teeth. I arrived with Rachel on one side and Caleb on the other, moving slowly in his chair, his hands resting calmly on the wheels like he had already decided not to give Vivian the satisfaction of seeing him shrink. Every head turned when we entered. Not loudly, not rudely, just enough for the room to understand what the emails had never shown them. This was not about porch style, exterior harmony, or a line item in a covenant binder. This was about a son trying to come home. Vivian Hartwell sat at the front table in a sapphire blue jacket with gold buttons, a silk scarf, bright red nails, and that same oversized clipboard held against her chest like a shield. Her perfume drifted over the first row before her voice did. "We are here to address an unfortunate misunderstanding," she began, smiling at the board members more than at us. Mr. Hayes installed an unapproved exterior structure and then escalated the matter through outside channels before allowing the association process to work. I heard Rachel inhale sharply beside me, but I touched her wrist. Not yet. Vivian clicked her pen and continued, saying words like compliance, fairness, precedent, and neighborhood integrity. She made the ramp sound like a rogue patio umbrella. She made herself sound like the only adult in a room full of feelings. Then the board chair asked if I wanted to speak. I did not stand dramatically. I did not raise my voice. I rolled the folder open on the table and began laying out the record one piece at a time. First, the email I sent before the removal, explaining the medical need. Then the coordinator's letter confirming Caleb required step-free access. Then the violation notices. Then the screenshots where Vivian discussed standards while leaving out the medical context. Then the photographs, the ramp before removal, the empty porch after removal, the screw holes, the stacked boards, the temporary van ramp we had been forced to use. The room got quieter with every page. Paper has a sound when it lands on a table in the right order. Soft, flat, final. Vivian shifted in her chair. Her bracelets clicked once, then went still. The association had not approved the design, she said. I placed Paul Renner's city inspection summary beside the photographs. The city accessibility office reviewed the build, I said. It did not block a sidewalk. It did not create a safety concern. It was more stable than most temporary ramps they inspect. One board member leaned forward and read the first page. Another rubbed both hands over his face. Caleb finally spoke, and his voice was quiet enough that people had to listen. "I did not ask for special treatment," he said. "I asked to enter my father's house through the front door. That did what all my paperwork could not do by itself. It put a human being back where Vivian had tried to keep only a rule." Mrs. Alvarez stood in the back and said she had seen the ramp, and it was safe. Tom Grady said the removal crew left screws in the grass. Rachel opened her phone and read Vivian's exact phrase from the email. "Emotional urgency does not override community procedure." The words sounded uglier out loud. Vivian's smile disappeared. The attorney on speakerphone, calm and careful, explained that once a housing provider or association receives notice of a disability-related access need, ignoring it and removing the accommodation can create serious legal exposure. Serious legal exposure. The phrase moved through the room like cold air under a door. The board chair looked at Vivian, then at Caleb, then at the file spread across the table. Why was this not brought to the full board before removal? He asked. Vivian opened her mouth, but for the first time since I had known her, there was no polished answer waiting. The board chair did not wait for Vivian to find a prettier version of the truth. He called for a closed review, and for once, Vivian was the one asked to leave the table while other people studied paperwork she had not controlled. Caleb sat beside me in the hallway outside the meeting room, his chair angled toward the vending machine, his face calm but tired under the fluorescent lights. Rachel stood behind him with one hand on his shoulder. I could hear muffled voices through the door, the low scrape of chairs, the thin rustle of pages being passed from person to person. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was worse for Vivian than loud, because it was careful. 30 minutes later, the door opened, and the board chair stepped out holding my folder like it had gained weight. He said the association would immediately withdraw all violations connected to the ramp, cover the cost of professional reconstruction, reimburse the removal invoice they had already tried to send me, and issue a written apology. Vivian stood near the coffee table, her sapphire jacket still bright, her gold bracelets still shining, but none of it looked powerful anymore. It looked like decoration without authority behind it. She resigned as president before the next regular meeting, calling it a personal decision. Maple Ridge called it what it was without saying the words too loudly. By Thursday morning, a licensed contractor was on my porch with treated lumber, proper brackets, fresh rails, and the city inspector watching the slope with a tape measure in hand. The sound of the drill came back, but this time it did not cut into me. It healed something. Each screw went down firm. Each board settled into place. The new ramp was wider than mine, cleaner than mine, and built to last longer than Vivian's excuse. I kept one piece of the old ramp, a short section of handrail I had sanded myself, and set it in the garage beside my father's tools. Not as a souvenir of what they did, but as proof that useful things can be taken apart and still come back stronger. That evening, Caleb rolled to the bottom of the ramp while the sky turned soft orange over Maple Ridge. Rachel stood by the porch with tears she did not bother hiding. Mrs. Alvarez watched from her driveway. Tom Grady raised one hand from across the street. Caleb placed both hands on the wheels, looked up at the front door, and moved forward. The wheels made a low, steady sound over the boards. No bump. No scramble. No apology. Just what holding weight the way it was supposed to. At the top, he stopped beside me and touched the rail. Feels solid, he said. I nodded because my throat would not give me anything better. Justice is not always a courtroom. Sometimes it is a ramp rebuilt one board at a time, so a son can enter his father's house through the front door with dignity. So tell me, what would you have done if someone hid cruelty behind rules and called it community standards? Share your thoughts, because stories like this remind us that quiet people are not powerless when the truth is measured, documented, and carried with patience. And if you believe the right kind of justice deserves to be heard, stay close to this channel, because the next story may begin with something small and end with someone finally being held accountable.